Kyle Kemper is a blockchain and cryptocurrency expert with a plan to return power to the people of Canada. Kyle co-hosts the Love and Freedom Show, and in his new book, Canadao, he presents the idea of a decentralized autonomous organization, a DAO, a new government model that would create a delegative liquid democracy. As the half-brother of Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, Kyle is actually grateful to Justin for pushing him to innovate. He is eager to explore ways of better representing the people and embrace the dawning of an abundant new age. Kyle's vision for the future would uplift sovereign people and sovereign states, cultivating collaboration from the grassroots rather than dictating from the top down. He doesn't want to overthrow the current regime. Instead, Kyle is inspired by this quote from Buckminster Fuller. "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete." Would people need digital IDs to participate in Kyle's vision for a decentralized government? And how would it be different from the technocratic tyranny that we may be facing? In our interview, we explore such timely questions, reflect on Canada's Freedom Convoy, and discuss how recent events have shaped family relations. We also consider ways in which every individual can awaken their personal liberty within the mind, heart, and spirit. I'm Sienna Mayhew, and this is Leaving the Left for Liberty. So Kyle, what I really love about your approach is your ability to balance the head and the heart, the left and right brain, if you will, in a time when it's very natural to cling to only logic or only emotion. And it's very easy to get lost in emotion and perhaps even to get lost in the headspace and lose the soul of the great awakening that we're in. So maybe we can spend some time together today balancing the head and the heart, speaking to the solutions that you have for the people of Canada and perhaps the people of the United States moving forward, and also talk about the connections you have to the people in political power, such as your brother, Justin Trudeau. Yeah.
Certainly, Sienna, and I'm really grateful to share this time and space with you and to engage in this discussion. We haven't met before, so I'm really looking forward to meeting through this fun format and seeing where we go on this. And on that note, I would like to say, yeah, I mean, we're just living in this really kind of crazy, polarized, divided kind of society, and there's so many forces of kind of fear and division always kind of attacking that that left side of the brain, if you will, that are I feel trying to kind of keep people into their lower vibrational beings. And if you look at kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the lowest level is safety and security. So if you can keep people focused on safety and security, they'll always be at that that lowest level. And when we give our attention and our focus towards that dementia, then we're going to be trapped in that area. I don't know. I guess I'm I'm a Canadian by birth. I have a Canadian passport. I grew up in Ottawa. I went to university out in Halifax. In 2013, I kind of had my kind of awakening to crypto and kind of recognized it as a solution to the cancer that is the central banks that's been plaguing humanity. And it kind of breathed some optimism and hope into me about that this represents kind of a new system that can make the existing one obsolete. um that was 2013, so here we are almost 9 years later, and it's been a journey that's kind of taken me all over the world and brought me into so many different circles. And I wouldn't say that everything changed with crypto. There's been a lot of learnings from before those times as well. And obviously my mother's Margaret Trudeau and my father's Free Kemper, and my half brother is Justin Trudeau, and I have another half brother, Alexandre Trudeau, and one who passed away named Michelle Trudeau. And I have a full sister named Alicia Kemper as well, who's 4 years younger than I am. And yeah, that's my familial relationship and or structure. And I guess recently I I've been pretty outspoken about kind of my positions, but I never really kind of like push. I found that when I try and push and try and force things to happen, that it never really kind of materializes too well. I mean, if there's like a real purpose and the energy's flowing, great things can happen. But when I try and force things, that doesn't really happen. When, like, just before kind of the Ottawa trucker movement, the Great Canadian Freedom Convoy took place, I was reached out by Melanie Ridson from the Western Standard, and we did an interview that was, I don't know, pretty close to an hour, and I guess it kind of went viral and like received a ton of views. And since then I've had all sorts of kind of requests for more kind of contact, and just keep using my voice and try to follow the four agreements, what I'm saying. And I think there's a lot of kind of anxiety and division and fear out there, and fear is kind of our greatest enemy, really the only enemy. And when fear is being utilized as a weapon to kind of control people, um, I kind of take issue with that. And I think we need to kind of, instead of being fearful or fighting or being angry, which ultimately when we get angry, we kind of give our power to those who we're getting angry at. So like thinking about, instead of being like anger, be conscious about, what's happening. And more than anything, like, channel your inner artist to kind of, criticize by creating. And so, on that note, I've written this booklet called Canada, which is a concept that I've been, you know, discussing and muddling around for a while, and was like, okay, it seems like, we're being pushed so hard right now by, like, this radical agenda. And, with the great darkness comes the great light as well. So it's like, and I think more people now than ever are, awakened, to the reality, and are becoming, stepping into their full power and to their full consciousness. And we have a great opportunity now to rethink systems and civilization design and community structures, and focus on abundant mentality and decommodification and radical inclusion and cooperation and immediacy and participation and civic responsibility. And and I think right now I'm really kind of looking at the civic responsibility, and from a technologist kind of background point of view, like a product point of view, looking at how can we build new tools and new models. So that's my little intro. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on and to hear more about your book and what is a DAO. What is Canada? The full title of your book I saw is Canada: How We Return Power to the People. And as I understand, DAO, DAO, stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And it's a new government model in the cryptocurrency space, kind of like a liquid democracy. I've heard it called that before, in which we'd return power and representation to the people of Canada in particular. So tell us more about what is a DAO and how would this work? Like, would the people need digital IDs to participate in a DAO?
Okay, lots there. Let's try and unpack these one piece at a time. So first, Canada is not a, it's unclear exactly kind of what it is. It's a concept right now. It's a vision. It's a prophecy, if you might say, about what is possible. I am conscious about trying to state this is exactly what something needs to be, because that kind of, you know, like, puts you in a bracket. But like, let's understand, like, you know, our current system. So our current system that we operate in is called the Westminster governance or government system, which is a, you know, a was birthed from the British system, and it was introduced to Canada at a time when, you know, we didn't have internet and lots of places didn't have electricity, and, you know, Canada was a huge nation, and when we're trying to bring people together to discuss, you know, the governance of Canada, we would need kind of basically representatives from all these different areas. So people would vote on a representative, and then they would go to Ottawa and they would represent their various area. And there was this party system within it as well. So you'd be part of a general party that had kind of a worldview, and people would identify with that, you know, those general philosophies of the party. And then, you know, this representative, like, you know, once elected, would be, you know, your ambassador for your region to this to the area. Now, we are in the year 2022. We have internet, we have blockchain technology, we have exponential technologies all around us. We can send a message, you know, from Tofino to St. John's in milliseconds. Um, does it make sense for us to be utilizing a system that was pre-internet, you know, pre-high-speed communications, pre-information age, you know, as our, like, you know, governing law of the land? And, you know, I parallel that with as well this concept that, you know, centralized organizations over time become more and more centralized, more and more secretive, and more corrupt. And we're at the point right now where the centralized system of governance has been going so long that it's become very corrupt, become very centralized, become very secretive. And, you know, the intentions of the system are to enable people's voices to be heard and active within policy discussions. And right now, I think I can speak for the vast majority of Canadians who do not believe their political representatives represent them at all, and they'd have no voice, you know, on there. For most people, some people do. The fabulously powerful and wealthy have a lot of voice, but is, you know, is their voice worth more than others? Well, that's another discussion. But ultimately, you know, I'm looking at new systems, and we have DAOs. So DAOs stands for decentralized autonomous organizations, and they've been used within the cryptocurrency industry, within the blockchain industry, to manage projects. So instead of, like, traditionally you would register a company with, you know, with the Ontario registry or the Canadian registry or whatever, and then, like, you know, you have a minute book and you make all your notes in there, and it's like actually a paper book that represents your ledger of decisions and bylaws, etc., for your organization. Um, you know, the DAO doesn't have any particularly jurisdictional registration. Its registration is in code, and within the code it's outlined, you know, what the bylaws are, how the decision making process works. Is it every person has, like, you know, one vote, or is it based on, in the form of cryptocurrencies, a lot of them it's like, you know, it's based on how many tokens you have within a project, dictates how much voting power you have within the project, which is very similar to the way that public companies operate and shares. So the number of shares you have within a company gives you the amount of voice you have within a company. If you're a founder of a project and you have the majority vote, you have the ability to, you know, act as a dictator within the system to be able to control the votes. But as you lose less than, like, you know, 50% or whatever kind of the decision making level is, um, then it either involves, like, working with others towards seeing decisions take place. So with DAOs, you know, we're seeing, and they're working and they're in action, utilizing tokens to, like, you know, cryptographically secured tokens to facilitate decision making and governance within organizations. And, you know, if we parallel that to, what happens in our Westminster Canadian Parliament, it's very much the same thing, except that, the individual stakeholders at the bottom of the pyramid are delegating their power, and there's a bunch of people going to Ottawa to, in who are basically inheriting or taking control of that voting power of all those people, despite the fact that, you know, like for example, like Jagmeet Singh, he got like 16,000 votes in the last election. He he got 40% of his riding, where only 50% of people actually showed up to vote. So like in reality, he got like about 20% of the votes. And now he is the leader of this party, and he's unilaterally making decisions that, we're going to work with the Liberal Party, which is also a minority, which also only received about 20% of the actual Canadians' votes, and of eligible Canadian votes. And together, based on like, they're combined, they're still a minority. They have effectively a dictate over federal decision-making power and spending in Canada. And, they don't, like, we could not have an election for like 3 years if they just keep working. And I think they will kind of keep it going, because ultimately they're all getting paid in this system. And like for every MP and their staff, they're all getting paid by this system. And like, that financial factor is, I would say, is more important than the morality factor of being, good stewards of Canada. But it's just like, a result of this heavily centralized system that gives so much power, to these, quasi-elected representatives. So I posit that there is a better way that we can do this. And if we start looking at these DAO technologies that have been utilized from financial perspectives and apply them towards civic governance and civic action, that, we can start actually, giving Canadians a voice, and potentially we could start seeing some action that, you know, is really in Canadians' best interests, but that is not in political best interests, because the parties are now just voting for themselves and for their own interests and for their stakeholders, which represent a lot of their funders and the corporations, the lobbyists, which is, you know, out of the purview of the Canadian individuals. And also there's this misnomer within our existing system that, somehow elections equal democracy. But like, I mentioned, we're in a pyramid, we're in this pyramid of control, and on the bottom is like, it's the people. And they will speak as if they're at the top of the pyramid, but they're not at the top of the pyramid. They're levels below on the pyramid. So when we vote for these lower level kind of minions within a hierarchical command pyramid structure, it's an illusion that we're making anything, because they're taking orders from the corporatocracy, that's taking orders from larger unelected power centers and power groups, that are taking orders from even smaller, more powerful groups. And that is the left brain, like reality, logical kind of look at it. And then it's like, okay, now to the heart, to the path forward, it's like, how can we take this pyramid and dissolve it into like a pool of consciousness where we're talking about ripples that are working together and acting together. And that's the way I see a DAO, a Canada DAO being like, one big ripple, being one big pool. And then within it, you've got like, your Ontario, if we just use the existing structures like Ontario, Quebec, Manitoba, PEI, like, different ones. And then within each of those circles, you've got Ottawa, Toronto, Mississauga, Midland, like, smaller different ones. And then even within those ones, you've got like, in Ottawa, you've got New Edinburgh, Rockcliffe, like, the glebe. And then even within those, you can even get into smaller little groups, into like the smaller little communities. And so, it's in each one of those circles can be organized, and civic action and radical collaboration and community cohesion and decision making can be enabled utilizing DAOs at the core. Now, how does one get a vote in this? And how does one participate in this? You mentioned digital ID. Well, considering these are digital systems, yes, there would be a component of digital ID. Digital ID is a much larger topic in and of itself. Many people think that digital ID is just like, a digital version of your driver's license. Well, your driver's license, not like if you think about your driver's license right now, it has many different pieces of information on it. It has your picture, it has your name, it has your date of birth, your height, your eye color, your address. And then it has a number, and then there's your license number. It also has classifications for what you're able to drive within the system. So what digital ID affords us the opportunity to do is break out all of those pieces into what are kind of termed identity shards, so that if you were, for example, pulled over by a police officer, and they asked for license and registration, you could provide them with your license number and a proof of your registration, and you wouldn't need to even tell them your name necessarily. Like, can you drive this car? Like, yes. Are you permission to drive? Like, sure, yes. And the same kind of example would be like, when you go to a nightclub, for example, like, in the States it's 21, in Quebec it's 18, and the rest of Canada it's 19. When you go to the club, they ask for your ID, you give them this card, and when you're giving that bouncer or like whoever it is the card, you're giving them much more information than they actually need, which can actually create a threat towards you. Like, you're an attractive woman, and like, if there's someone on this side, like the bouncer has a bad soul and a bad agenda, or is like, a dangerous person, and he takes down your name, and there's also your address too. Like, that can create problems, whereas all he's trying to do is verify that you're over the age of 18. So if one of your components of identity is your age, and they're simply like, from a digital ID point of view, they're asking you, are you over this date? Are you older? Were you born before this date? And then it's just like, yes, like, okay, you're in. Like, and this is like, one of the elements to that. Now, that was my little short on digital ID. But when we pull back towards like, how it would work within voting, it's like the same kind of way. In Canada, you get like a voter ID card, you get this piece of information. And if that had, a QR code on it, for example, and some people don't like QR codes, but really they're just a representation of information and like a link to something. So if you scan that and you acquire like, your voting token, or your an NFT that allows you to vote on these things, and there's ways that you can protect the information, but that could allow you that's already been proven based on this registry. And now here's like, this digital token that can act like, in addition to the existing kind of system. And it's like leveraging their already existing kind of like, people database is one method that it could can operate off. And then people come in, and then it's okay now. But instead of like, now is when we get to this concept of liquid democracy. So liquid democracy is a form of democracy that melds direct democracy with delegative democracy. Direct democracy means you can vote on everything. You have the power to vote on everything. So if we had direct democracy in Canada, like true direct democracy, you would have the ability to vote on every single House of Commons item, on every provincial like, legislature item, on every municipal council vote, you would be able to vote. Now, delegative democracy is where, I trust you, Sienna. I want to give you my vote. And other people might trust you, and they could give you your votes. And when you vote, you carry your vote plus other people's votes. And if I didn't like the way you voted, then after you voted, I could take back my power and, like, because it holds you accountable. Whereas right now, these politicians, they go out and they campaign on platitudes and emotions and all this crap, and they run these incredibly expensive campaigns, and they work with their bought and paid for media to, like, to build these fake personalities. And then when they get into power, they have no, they're beholden to none, they're not beholden to their voters in any way, and there's no accountability, and there's no ability for the voters themselves to remove that power. Like, we don't have a recall process in Canada. It basically takes them to, like, step down. We don't even have, like, we don't even have, like, like an ethics thing, like, system, where if someone breaks the rules, like, they're cast out from this system, and there's, like, an immediate by-election. There's many kind of issues there, and this new form is, is an opportunity to rethink this. And, I am at the point now where trying to convene stakeholders, from different groups, and get the different inputs, and think about, what are some of the topics in Canadians' lives that, like, I think all Canadians would agree to, but the political establishment, like, will never vote on. And those are really important kind of questions to have. And then looking at, like, some of the technical issues, some of the awareness kind of challenges, like, how do you bring people into this? How do we make this an acceptance movement and not a resistance movement? Because it's like, we don't want this to be like, a fight, but if we can build a tool that really is, like, it satisfies this massive transformational purpose of, like, power in the people, that people that, like, hopefully, the great super majority of people agree with, then, we can operate with that and start building our systems from there. So I said a lot there. Thank you for holding space for me.
Absolutely. So when you were drawing those circles of the states and the smaller, like the smaller spaces of even like cities, what I was imagining are like sovereign states and sovereign local governments coming together and collaborating rather than succumbing to a dictating federal government that's top down. So this is a more grassroots approach, one that's more sovereign and still includes, or rather it includes, like, more opportunities for accountability, which I think a lot of people are looking for now. How do we hold these politicians accountable, and how do we hold the people even above them accountable? And it sounds like it's not really overthrowing the government, it's offering a new model that would make the old one obsolete. And while you were talking, I was really curious, like, how could this transition, like, what could this transition be like for someone like your brother, like Justin Trudeau, who is so committed to the old system?
Yeah, I mean, with, like, accountability, if he wants to be, a steward, then he can still go out and try and raise votes. But, there's, if you deviate from the course of the people, like, it really holds a level of accountability and responsibility in your position. So I don't, he, like, he said things like, Canadians voted for mandates. Like, they did not vote for mandates. All the parties that you allowed, that, like, were allowed to be part of the debates, and part of, like, this, I don't know, theater election, were we're all for, like, this ridiculous unscientific, kind of profiteering kind of motive, and control domination, um, philosophy. um, but, for him, like, ultimately, like, you know he has in his role become such like a figurehead. I just don't believe we need to have these like deity figures, like, that people like have so much hope in. And it's like, that he's going to be everything. Like, no, man, you give someone that much power, but it's like, it's a misnomer. He doesn't have that much power. Like, he has this illusion of that much power. And like, he's acting as like, a energy vortex for tons of people's anger and love. And it's like, it's all coming into like, this individual personality's ego. um and I think that's like, that is a detriment to free society and free Canadians and free peoples, like, because this operates everywhere. This is the same in the States. It's like, it's Biden or Trump, and it's like, remember, puts all that hope in those individuals, and it's like you're just giving away all your power. Like, recognize that power is within your heart, within your mind, within your communities, within your families, within your circles. And it's not something that should just be like, afforded and given away. But I think that's like, part of this construct of like, submission to a hierarchical programmed hypnotizing society that really believes that it's in people's best, like people need to be managed. And I believe that Justin also kind of has this, like, he's suffering from some sort of hypnosis, like kind of mass hypnosis, where he believes that, referendums are a bad idea, that that people don't really deserve that much power, that that they know best, that their plan is for the best of everybody. um yeah.
Yeah, and during the convoy, it became so clear how how far he was from the reality of all Canadians. Like when he spoke to what's best for Canadians, he only spoke to the sector of Canadians who agreed with him. And this bloom is a really nice word of putting it, but like this bloom of corrupt power during and after the convoy, um, it was in the form of police brutality, freezing convoy supporters' bank accounts. He accused Melissa Lantsman, an MP who is of Jewish descent, of a Holocaust survivor's descent. He accused her of standing with people with swastikas, which was absurd and really heartless because he was given 3 opportunities to apologize and he did not apologize. And I really wondered too, like, is he under some sort of hypnosis? Why is he doing all of this? Why would he ignore a letter sent from Israeli scientists warning him about the rhetoric that he's using, calling these supporters Nazis, among other things? Um, and and even now, like some of those bank accounts are still frozen. Last I checked, and he and other members of parliament are pushing digital IDs for the people of Ontario, and he just keeps going and going and
Yeah.
going. Why do you think he's doing all of this?
Well, and I'd say like those digital IDs in Ontario, this is not like, an open like quest for self-sovereign digital IDs. These are like, these are more tools for control. Why is he doing this? I mean, it's like, is this coming from his own heart, or is he trapped as well and like, being forced to do this? Justin is not a free man at all. Like at all. He is in a prison. Like, he might be a prison that has a private jet that goes around, but he can't go out into society. He can't make his own decisions. He's got a security detail around him that, protects him from outside, but it also protects him from going outside, and engaging in those other circles. Ultimately, like, he went on to this path because I don't know, we wanted to, or felt like a need to, or he had people whispering in his ears to do that. And I think that was one of the keys. Like, he was a child of Canada. Lots had like, from a planning point of view, like, if I was like the parties, or if I was a, a nefarious kind of evil, or not evil, but if I was a nefarious kind of centralized controller, I would recognize Justin Trudeau at a very young age, being this is someone who can, um, who we can, like, create a, almost like a deity like figure out of, so that he can take a position of power and execute our will when time comes, and through kind of coercion and um, potentially blackmail or something along those lines, like, you could trap him, and then, like, okay, you gotta stay on this line, like, otherwise your worst fears will come true. And so then, he might be under duress in making these decisions, but it seems like he's, like, genuinely speaking these terrible words. And yeah, so I I, I wonder, like, where he can kind of, go out of this. And it's just, there's so much double speak in everything he says too, like, it's just beyond belief. It's like all the anti-hate groups are the most hateful groups. Like, for him to declare that, like, that she's standing with swastikas while he's over in Europe right now, like, doing photo ops with, like, paramilitary, and literally supporting, like, I don't really want to touch too much, but, like, the Azov, battalion within the Ukrainian army are, like, have the SS symbol right in their logo, like, and literally wave around swastikas. So I mean, it's a little bit ironic, it's a little bit hypocritical to be saying those kind of things. um and I just feel like this is part of this double speak where, I don't want to say that it's, we're living under like a Nazi society, because that word is just like, it's a really polarizing word, and it really triggers people. But I would say we are under a state of, like, radical fascism right now, and, like, this totalitarian push and these ridiculous agendas, and, like, seizing people's bank accounts, restricting your ability to travel within a country, restricting your ability to travel outside of the country, like, without taking a forced medical procedure, or not a forced medical, without taking an experimental medical kind of, like, injectable. Like, this is, like, really, this is, you're violating all of our rights, and it doesn't seem like there's too much respect for, our fundamental rights anymore. And, but and all this being said, I'm actually grateful for this. Like, obviously, like, it's terrible, and I think it's, like, it's crimes against humanity that, he and the people behind him are committing. But while they're doing this, they're also pushing us. They're pushing, the free people, the light workers out there to create. And, without this, it was like, it's going to keep rolling. But now they're, like, pushing so hard. The pressure's building. Like, we're in this chaos stage that ultimately, like, everything's going to go up in the air, and then it's going to settle into, in my belief, a sacred pattern. And so, while, like, it tough times, create great men and women. So um,
Yeah, and I fell into the vortex that you were speaking of at the end of the convoy, when so much of this happened, the police brutality, freezing accounts, and all of that unity and that energy, while it still existed, like, personally, I sort of forgot for a few days, and I was really in a deep despair. And then I watched one of your videos, and you talked about that, about how, like, this pressure is just, it's like this pressure cooker, and it's just like cooking up all of this creation energy and all this art among those of us that are ready for something new. And I think that's why I'm so fascinated by, like, the microcosm of your family, because within that microcosm there's this great contrast that perhaps is really personified in your relationship with Justin. So I'm curious, when was the last time you guys spoke, and what was that conversation like?
um Yeah, I think I spoke to him. The last time I actually like talked to him was my wedding. It's been a long time since we've
Mm.
actively talked. It was my wedding in August of 2020, and I invited him to come to it. And we had a small wedding because of the COVID theater and the ridiculous fear state that everybody was in, and the fact that our venue got shut down and blah 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 whatever.
Mm.
But with him, I mean, but before that, there had been this reckoning that you know we can be family and like play, but when it comes to like his work, policy and politics and future of humanity, like there's a firewall there, and that's probably a good thing because yeah, I don't like, I know what they're, or I feel like I have a good understanding of, that group is, and I dissent. And so, that's there. And as a result, it's been kind of challenging for like, my family. And I think a lot of my family members are under a state of hypnosis, like, really believing, in the lies, and the fabricated narrative. And because, they consume a lot of like, programs via the channels on the television. Um,
Yeah.
and so like and but not all like that. And like in general, like since speaking out, it's been a flood of positive messages and positive feedback and encouragement, and like a willingness to also activate, and so many lovely messages. I'm super grateful and try to respond to all of them if I can, even some like really negative ones too, like not negative like to me, but like really negative towards him. Like some people like just like said some really terrible things, and I was like, I can't, like, let's talk, like let's talk this through, dude. Like, you see you're just so angry right now, and you're so hateful, and you'd be willing to like throw your whole life away and cause like so much damage by doing this. Like, just, can we, like, how do we, like, can you move out of that left side or that low vibration anger state and like start thinking more about yourself and like the divinity within you and your ability to create and connect. And like you're like, I think a lot of Canadians have felt very isolated and detached. And when we give so much attention and power to these tiny tyrants and their dictates and these fake regulations and fake mandates that are like just broadcast on media, but they'll never stand up in court, assuming our courts like are conscious and competent and still remember like that 1 + 1 = 2. um then like I don't like have too much of that. So I think it's really important that like we all kind of like step back into our power, and like as Chris Gaia says, like just say no. Like united non-compliance is really important, and doesn't mean like violent non-compliance. And I think what we saw out of the the freedom convoy was just like such an incredible experience of unity and collaboration and co-creation and inclusion and participation and gifting, decommodification. Like, oh yeah, that's why I call it like freezing man, because it really was like it was like Burning Man but in like -20-degree weather. and and I think for a lot of people who went there, like they never even heard of Burning Man or been there, but to see that type of like that energy, like it was like it was a vortex that was blasting out. And the political establishment and the mainstream media like just didn't cover it or engage it, just attacked it and smeared it. And like, but I would say also it was like, it was a bubble of this kind of radical consciousness. And like, outside of it, like you only had to go like, a couple kilometers, and then, within the houses are families that, are still deep in the spells, that were like, taking rapid tests every day, and like, surprised when they saw a positive sign, and would self-isolate, and all that crap is just based on a bunch of BS. But it's been programmed so heavily, and like people have been lied to over and over and over again so many times that, like, the lie becomes the truth, and when it keeps going, then they become the defenders of the truth, of the lies, and then they start being the repeaters and the propagators of it. So that's like, one of these things to be conscious of. And it's like, there's a good scene in the Matrix about, um it's like, they might look like your friends, but like at any moment, like, the agent in them can come out. And I think that's true for a lot of people who, um you know taken the blue pill, and like, just are, they're not, they're afraid, of like, the red pill, because they see, like, they know in their hearts that like things are messed up. But it's like, it's a scary idea to, to have that, self-realization, and like, shift your perspective, to realize that, the world is run by monsters, or that there are monsters who are wielding a lot of power and control. um, and that's like, the danger of like the paranoid kind of like, red pill approach, which I think a lot of people go into as well, and they feel like helpless and tiny. And but part of like, the true becoming, the neo in all of you, is like, recognizing that it's just an illusion. You hold so much power within yourself, and everybody also holds that power. But it's like, step into your power and do the very best you can every day. And like, you can start like, going, like, realizing that you are not this little box. You are not like, when someone asks you, oh, what do you do, and you identify, well, I am a tax specialist at the Canada Revenue Agency. It's like, okay, well, I'm sure you're more than that. Sure, like,
Mm.
do you love
Ma-
dogs?
yeah. Like maybe the next question can be, what do you make? What do
Yeah.
you
What do
create?
you create? What are you passionate about? Like,
Yeah.
what's your jam? What gets you going? um as opposed to, that. I remember, like, that was one of the reasons I love my wife so much, when, well, like, why I do, was like, she'd be just out there and just naturally just engaging with people, and like connecting in a heart space with everybody, and like, I had no care about, like, the ego of, oh, you're this person, or your net worth is this much, or oh, you're so powerful here or there. No, it's like actually just like, meeting people for who they are. um because when it's just like, when you get into like, the judgment of things, it's like, and making assumptions like, oh, you don't have any money, therefore you're not, like, worth listening to. It's like, come on. Like, some people, money is like a really big thing. For other people, it's not a big thing. Like, like,
Mm.
I don't believe anybody would even, like, believe my how much money I have in my bank account. Like, not. It's probably the opposite of what you think.
Mm. The idea of not making assumptions reminds me of the Four Agreements, which I know you're a big fan of. It's a practical guide to personal freedom by Don Miguel Ruiz. And one of the four agreements is don't make assumptions. The other three are be impeccable with your word, don't take anything personally, and always do your best. How does this list of 4 agreements shape your thinking and your way of creating?
Well, first, if you have not read, to the audience and whatever hearts, minds, souls that might be watching, if you have not read this book, definitely get this book and read it. It's a short read. It's really powerful, and this is like, key to unlocking, like, self freedom and kind of self love and living without regrets, because by understanding, like, these 4 agreements and being impeccable with your words is the first one. It's understanding that your words cast white magic and black magic. So, for example, like, if you tell a child, like, they're ugly, like, like that, like, sometimes you might be, or like, no, maybe not ugly. Well, ugly, yeah, that's really hard words that can, like, then they can make assumptions and think that they're ugly, and then they can really impact their entire life, and create harm and distress, etc. But you can also, like, you can, like, maybe your kid's playing music and it's like, or singing, like, you have a terrible voice, so can you just be careful with the words. Or also, like, you can cast, like, you be try to be impeccable with your words, and to not, to understand the power in your words. And words can both be spoken, but they can also be written, they can also be tweeted, like, there's many different forms. They can be, they can be, a poster, whatever the different things. They can be, there's many different kind of forms in which our words can take shape. But understanding, like, that like, you're being careful about your words, because your words really are spells. And and that kind of ties into, like, the don't take things personally. Like, when somebody says, you're, like, you're an asshole, it's like, nobody likes you, this, that, the other thing, kind of like, those things, you're worthless, you're dumb, you're stupid, like, on the negative side, like that. If you take those things personally, like, it can rock you, and you're kind of, you can have a misguided sense of who you are. And that also goes with benefits too, with the positives. So if people are like, wow, you're amazing, you're incredible, everybody loves you, blah blah blah, then it kind of like inflates the ego too. So it's like, just, like, trying to just to not take things personally. And then you get to assumptions, which is like, again, based on words. If, like, if you factor into the assumptions, if someone tells you something about another person and you then believe in that other person, then you meet that other person and you operate with that assumption, like, you're coming in with a warped perspective of, who they are. And I think that this is really important right now too, especially when we're dealing with, like, all this, like, psychological warfare and all of this information, that there's so many assumptions being thrown around as gospel, like, follow the science, like, the science, like, you've got to do this, like, this is for health and safety, and it's like, don't question anything. It's like, guys, like, you're just making so many assumptions, and, like, we're not open to, like, to any practical debate about these things, that, it's it's like you're combining, like bad words with dangerous assumptions, and then you also take things really personally. So there, you can see where that state goes to. It goes to a state of deception and kind of chaos, um and then, which will ultimately lead to, um guilt, and, like, regret, and, like, you questioning your actions before, because, like, if you've been, a lying deceiver for a long time, like, that weighs on your soul and on your conscience. And, like, and then the last one is just always do your best. Whereas if you're always doing your best, and you're, like, trying to follow these agreements, and, like, it doesn't mean doing more than your best, doesn't mean being, like, like totally crazy, but just in what you're doing, just, like, do your best. Then you can operate with, like, with no regrets, and, like, live, in your now moment, and, embrace love and embrace freedom, and, and be at a centered place, so you can start rising up through your own, you know to your own pyramid of consciousness or line of consciousness through multidimensional being that you all are.
That's really interesting that you made the same shape of the pyramid regarding the individual as you did like the pyramid of power.
Yeah, and even that I'm like a little like I kind of like regret that a little
Oh,
bit
you
because
do?
that's like
uh,
Maslow and his
yeah.
hierarchy of needs, but it's like, it's I don't know, it's like this, it's almost like an inverted pyramid of like, at the bottom, like there's, when you're operating, like, instead of it being this pyramid that Maslow had designed, if you invert the pyramid and recognize that at the bottom it's the most limiting, like, your consciousness is so small when you're garnered in this fear and safety state, whereas when you get to like, full, like, in his, according to him, like self-actualization, the realm of possibility is so much greater, consciousness is so much larger, there's so much, you can be, tapped into, so many different, like, informations, knowledges, possibilities, experiences, exposures, like, like release yourselves from things like fear of death and fear of, fear of past actions, and forgiving yourself for the things that you've done in the past, and, self-compassion. And, I think that kind of segue into like, the healing that needs to go on. Because I don't know about you, but I feel like there's a lot of healing that needs to take place.
There is a lot of healing that needs to take place within the self, within individuals. And, that gets lost in discussions around liberty. Like we're often talking about like systems and groups and like interactions with people and how we can maybe separate ourselves and just be completely independent. But part of personal freedom, personal sovereignty is being free within yourself, within your mind, within your heart, within your spirit. And then we can work our way out to groups of friends, family, political figures. And those groups mingle, like we have local political figures who are in families, like as you experience as well. And like when, especially in the US, we have like we the people, we have a lot of language that's like the people are first, the politicians are the servants of the people. And whether we like it or not, people include politicians, politicians are people. Like they have families, you have kids, Justin has kids, you have the same mom. When she was with Pierre, like when she first met him, he was quite a bit older than her, he was in a position of power, and he was really working to mold her as the perfect wife. There was a lot of control in that chapter of her life. And of course she had Justin, and then down the line she met your dad and had you. And when she described that part of her life, it sounded a lot more wholesome and free. So I'm curious, like, when we look at that shift in her life, in your mom's life, how might that parallel to what we're seeing in the world? Like that shift from control to collaboration, from dictating to really living fully and freely. Like what parallels are you seeing, and how might you speak to like the differences between Justin's childhood and your own?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to like, if you're living in an intolerable relationship, like you've got to like create space from it. And so, yeah, I mean, my mother's been on, you know, her story is immense, and that's, for her to tell, and I love her with all my heart, and she's, been on a journey, and now she's in her 70s, and I'm hoping that she can kind of, find peace as well, because I know that, my words are, probably affecting her a little bit, because, she's been like really, you know, if your son was the prime minister, like pretty proud, and then all of a sudden, like, you know, there's these flags everywhere, and everywhere he's going, like people are so angry, and all of a sudden, like, you're seeing like so much hate at, one of your children, and that's going to be tolling. And yeah, but ultimately, like, I think, and it's like to my mother, it's like, I say like ho'oponopono, which is an ancient kind of, which is like, kind of a Hawaiian healing prayer, um, which goes 4 simple lines. It is, I'm sorry. And this is both like a self-compassionate thing that, but also can be used with others. So it's like, to yourself, like, be like, apologize, like, say, like, begin by apologizing to yourself or to others. And then the second is to say, like, ask for forgiveness and please forgive me. And like, forgiving yourself too for, past actions and offering that to others. Say, please forgive me. And then be, I am thankful or I am grateful. That's kind of the third line. And, recognizing all the positives and all the lessons. And like, that's why I say, even Justin, like, I'm really, I'm grateful for all of our life experience together, like, even up to now. And then the last is just, I love you. And, that to yourself as well. Make sure you love yourself and, you have self-compassion for yourself so that, you can heal. Like, the human species is the only species of animal out there that will live in deep guilt and regret for past actions and continue punishing itself over and over and over again for things that happened in the past. Like, forgive yourself, move on. Don't keep putting yourself back into some past state that's not this state now. Your past does not dictate your future. Your past might have, like, consequences on the future, but it's not, doesn't dictate the future. Like, you can learn from the past, you can plan for the future, you can act in the now, you can live, in the eternal, in the ethereal.
Hmm. That's beautifully said. And I wonder too what healing needs to happen within, even within our political system and among those people in positions of more corrupt power. And I think because we on this side of the line have been dehumanized in a lot of ways. I try not to succumb to those same forces of like dehumanizing even people who I really have very little respect for. So, what is the system that we're dealing with? You spoke about this pyramid, and perhaps like politicians like Biden, Trudeau, these guys are not necessarily at the top. Who is at the top, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, I think, like, JP Sears did a good video the other day. Is Klaus Schwab the most dangerous man on the planet? Like, I think that was a good one.
That was amazing.
To
It was,
look
yeah.
into it. And that, like, his like top science advisor talking about, like, basically hacking free will through vaccines and genetic manipulation. Like, that's pretty important. Like, that's like a pretty telling statement to be coming from, like, this echelon of people. I mean, everything that these kind of people get state is kind of in plain sight. That's part of the spell casting, like, process. Some people say it's like, it's like Satanists. I don't fully disagree with that. It seems like, there is really dark kind of evil force, and there is, like, some nefarious agendas taking place here. Yeah, I mean, you look like Bill Gates, not hard to look. Anthony Fauci. I mean, Anthony Fauci is, like, one of the key people that is responsible for a lot of this madness. Um, and then also it's just like, the nature of this pyramid. You can look into the different groups, so the Trilateral Commission, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Bilderberg Group, World Economic Forum, the Club of Rome, the Vatican, like the monarchy, um, different power structures, operating together. The central bankers, obviously, the families behind the central bankers, central banks, Federal Reserves, where it's federal is Federal Express. Like, it is not a government institution. It is not a publicly owned or operated. It is a private corporation. Um, yeah, it has a government appointed governor, but that's as far as that goes. Um, so yeah, it's just like, these secret kind of organizations that have been getting more and more powerful and wielding more and more power. Underneath this hierarchical kind of pyramidal, debt-based corporate society. Um, I had a great pleasure last night of speaking to a man named Sasha Stone, um, and he has some very kind of clear, kind of telling, powerful thoughts about the roots of a lot of these power dynamic control structures. And again, it's like when we look at them, I think it's important that we understand them and like are conscious of them, but not to like focus too much power on them or like highlight them. It's one of the things about like Alex Jones, for example. Like, I really appreciate Alex Jones. I think he's a great guy, and I had a fantastic talk with him. But ultimately, like, not but and one of the things what he came to do is really highlight what's going on in there's different sides to the narrative. But at the same time, it's also like, just by highlighting it and putting so much energy and attention on it, it kind of manifests them as well. And that was what I kind of challenged Alex, was like, Alex, like, can you like talk about the solutions, like, as opposed to that, like, for all the darkness and the evil, like, what's the light and what's the positive? And can we, like, give more attention and more drive and do more action towards that? That's like one of the issues with the QAnon thing too, was like, it was like, tell you, like, lay out all these different, like, conspiracy theories allegedly, like, but and in this compelling package. But then at the end of the day, like, their main action was, you don't need to do anything. It's like, just wait. It's like 2 weeks darkness, or like a month of this or whatever. It's like something, the tunnels are being blown up, there's stuff happening in the backgrounds, like, they say all this. It's like, you don't need to do anything, which takes, like, those who are most kind of aware of a lot of these things, because a lot of the things they were grabbing, like, a bunch of them, and like, co-opting them. And maybe this was a point, is trying to, like, to put them all underneath this umbrella so it can be discredited and created, like, positioned as this subversive outlier, that can be attacked and shut down. But there was like this, the core was like, this message, you don't need to do anything, when no, you really do. We do need to do things. We need to create, we need to make art, we need to, like, to make art in our own ways, because each of us, like, this is art right here, of us just talking, of broadcasting, of expressing, of casting these words and these spells out there. And hopefully, like, one heart or mind gets touched, and it's all worth it, and it transforms, and it helps with this general transformation. Because if it wasn't in, like, massive actions, like gigantic actions, that we got to this point. It was through incrementalism. And, like, the same thing, like, their power got really high and our power was really low, but now it's like they're dimming out, and we're going from this age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius. And it's just like, it's like the dimming of lights, and not everybody's going to come along on this journey. But
Hmm.
ultimately, nothing can stop this transition. Like, nothing, I believe that nothing can stop the great awakening of humanity. It's just a matter
So
of time.
if not everyone is coming, and I sense that as well. If not everyone is coming on this transition, what is it going to be like for the people who are left behind, so to speak?
Well, understand that, like, we're like, an age is like a almost like a 2100-year kind of time frame. So, and we're really in, like, really right in the transition time. So it's like, we're right on the line. So, just as we move forward, like, people will pass and then they'll come back as Aquarians. Like, in the Pisceans won't be, as in power. So it's like they're gonna try and hold on. Like, they're questing for immortality, and, like, through genetic modification and transhumanism, to be able to live forever. And I think a bunch of Aquarians as well are looking at that as, like, at the same time too, um about, like, how can we utilize this amazing technologies that we have to turn the brakes off on our cell degeneration, um, to solve major problems. But at the same time, I feel like that same technology has been weaponized against us too. As I mean, we have no idea, we have no visibility into what's in these files. Um, like, it's just so crazy that they've been able to do this. And yeah, and I think, there's going to be a lot of kind of, there's a chance that a lot of people, like, suffer from this, or are negatively impacted from it, and will suffer dire consequences of it. And I think that's why it's important that we focus on ourselves and protecting our bodies and our health, and our hearts and our spirits, and our minds, more than anything, is keeping
Mm.
our minds sharp and aware of dangers, not succumbing to fear.
And within a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization, would this system offer a space for people to be better?
I mean, I think so. I think it allows us the opportunity to challenge things, and to, like, instead of everything being just like, politicians create the votes and then people vote on it, and that spending happens right from there. It's like, if the people want to put up challenges, or create things, or come together to create something, it's like, they can fund it and create it themselves, and, like, put forth basically bounties or prizes towards achieving some sort of ideal outcome end state. And it's like, like, enabling this expression of creativity, so long as it's kind of core to a, you know whether it be a charter of rights and freedoms, or, like, a universal constitution, or like some sort of underlying principles based kind of document for the new age, which I believe people are working on, and people have been working on these ideas. I think we got great thinkers like Gandhi and Martin Luther King, and many of the people of today who are also sharing these things. And we're going to probably see some, like, truly impeccable documents come out, that are can cast a spell of a beautiful, um, foundational principles and respect and abundance, on
Mm.
which us to operate. Because, I mean, law, like, we're living in a perverted society right now, and we're, the existing one is, and yeah, the systems, so we'll just build around it. And I think when people are presented with opportunities and given hope that isn't like, a Barack Obama kind of hope kind of image, or like, a Justin Trudeau kind of hope image, like, they're actually, like, given an opportunity to participate and feel valued, and share in the creation and the benefit and the abundance that it outputs. um that's the that's a key to, a successful exponential radical collaboration experience. And we don't need to be held back by these legacy systems, which is why we need a new system of civic action and engagement to enable people to challenge these these really broken systems by putting forth a challenge for new systems. People talk about the Canadian healthcare system, like, oh, it's so amazing, it's the idol of the world. Like, no, it's not. No, it's not. It's not an amazing healthcare system. It's like free for the people, but it's not an amazing healthcare system. It can take 6 months to get an MRI. It's not an amazing, and it also is a huge drug pushing system too. And it's free, but that means somebody's paying for it. So the government's just paying this paying inflated pharma tabs, and they're still following the germ theory pharmaceutical doctrine of prescribe and treat versus cure or prevent. That's one aspect of that requires kind of deeper discussion and delineation and exploration. And same with the concept of taxes, and same thing about energy, travel, and creativity and spaces, and city designs and community designs and First Nations too. How do we give them some respect, instead of treating the First Nations as this constant victim story of, oh, this and that and this and that, and just basically fucking taking their power all the time from them. No, how about you guys are the ancients, step into your power. Let's work. Let's look at these ancient structures on which you operate, regarding the potlatch, for example, or the wealth redistribution, or the way that you take care of, or elder circles, grandmother circles, tribe taking care of the families, because those of my age would be out hunting and creating and gathering and building, and when my little children would be being taken care of by the elders in the community. It wouldn't be me and my wife in charge of just our children. This nuclear American family is not is this the best we can do? Is this the best that how we can organize? And so and ultimately, I'm making the actions to change that, looking at, okay, homeschooling the children, not putting them in the system, working with collectives of people. It's not fully there, but recognizing, why are you living where you're living? Do you know your neighbors? Are you really happy here? Do you have the ability to grow? Do you have the ability to feed yourself? Do you have water? Do you have power? Looking at these types of thinking critically about that. And if you're feeling stuck, unstuck yourself, and it starts by looking at your feet and breathing.
Yeah, uplifting the individual. And there is so much wisdom that comes from First Nations peoples. Actually, my previous episode was with 2 Indigenous peoples who attended the convoy, and now they're protesting in Quebec.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah, you got to watch it. You will love it.
I would love to. And same with Ottawa. I mean, Ottawa is oh gosh, it's I was on my car, I have a spray painted thing that says "Free the Falls," and it's it's a whole thing about the Chaudière Fall, the falls. And how they took basically one of the most sacred sites in North America and stuck a dam across it, and to power government buildings and a toilet paper factory in downtown Ottawa. It's disgusting. And it's there's been a real quest towards repatriating that land, removing that dam, because we don't need that dam. We just don't need it. There we have all sorts of other energy sources. Let the water flow, because it would be so, you can't even, there was literally for years there's no way to even properly view it unless you're just driving across the bridge and you look over whoa, look at that.
Yeah, we can really do a lot better, and I'm really excited to have connected with you. I would love to do another deep dive with you
You too.
whenever. Yeah, this was awesome. I know you have to get going, but Kyle, bless you, love and light. Keep doing
Sienna,
what you're doing.
bless you, love and light, everybody out there. Ho'oponopono, and thank you. Go forth and be truthful, fearless, and gentle. Have a wonderful day and stare into that sun as long as you can.
Good advice. All right.
All right.
All
Bye
right.
bye.
Bye,
Thank you.
Kyle.
Love, love. Bye.